All right, good morning and welcome. I'm Mike Selden. I'm the Director of Member Information Services for MTA, and coming to you for our COVID Q&A today, and to take your questions on what all these different executive orders mean for your township and what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be conducting township business right now. So with me, I am joined by a few experts. And as we go through this, if you have questions, we have a few questions that have already been sent in that we're going to start with. But as we go through, if you have some questions, go ahead and type those into the chat box. If you can include all recipients on it, then that way everybody can see what questions you're asking, so we don't get the same questions repeated while we're waiting to get to them. If you just send it to all panelists, we'll still try to get to your questions. But if you send it to everybody, again, then people can see what you're asking, so they don't ask the same ones, because a lot of times people have the same question. This is scheduled to go till 1 o'clock, so we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can between now and 1 o'clock. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and start introducing my experts here today. And I've got Catherine Mullhaupt, who's our staff attorney at MTA. She's been with MTA for almost 30 years now in a variety of roles, but most recently, for the last number of years, she's been our staff attorney. And while she is an attorney, we don't give specific legal guidance, but a lot of the questions that we answer and stuff are legal in nature. And Catherine's our expert on FOIA. She's literally now written the Little Red Book, or so the book on townships. So she's got a vast variety of knowledge and stuff when it comes to townships. Cindy Dodge, she is she's a former clerk, and she's kind of our expert on cemeteries, elections, a lot of treasurer functions, tax collection, stuff like that. So she's our go-to person for a lot of that. She is a certified assessor. So if you've gone to our board of review trainings, you've probably seen Cindy there teaching there. So she's active. She does a lot of stuff. She's been with MTA for I think 13 or 14 years now. So a great asset. And then Seth Koches is our other panelist here, and he is an associate attorney with Bauckham, Thall, Seeber, and Kaufman. Prior to joining the firm, he worked as an assistant prosecuting attorney for 7 years in Oakland and Kalamazoo counties prosecutors' offices. And his primary practice encompasses pretty much every aspect of municipal law. Bauckham, Thall, Seeber, and Kaufman, they are MTA legal counsel. Again, we don't provide specific legal guidance to townships, but oftentimes if you guys call up with questions that we don't necessarily know the answers to, we'll reach out to them to try to get some more guidance that we can help share. So that's who I'm here with today. And again, I'm going to serve as your moderator. So I'm going to get to the first question here that came in prior, and it is, if the stay-home order is still in effect, and the only way the public body, such as a planning commission, can meet is in person. So virtual meetings are saying aren't in the question. Teleconference isn't in the question, so they can only meet in person. Can they still meet in person as a planning commission? And if the answer is yes, how does the public attend that without violating the stay-at-home order if the planning commission can still meet in person? And if no, how is the planning commission still supposed to function if they can't meet in person and these virtual meetings aren't available? Not everybody.
Right. I mean, I guess I'll start, and then if Cindy or Catherine want to add on, obviously feel free to do that. So regarding planning commission meetings, right now construction is permitted. So if you have a special use application, or maybe there's a variance from a construction company that wants to do some work, we're of the opinion that you can process that type of application. I wouldn't process other types of matters that come in front of a planning commission, such as a text amendment or something like that, at least not for an in-person meeting. So we're of the opinion you can meet in person if you're unable to meet remotely or electronically. Now, the whole issue is if you're going to meet in person, something that you still have to do is provide the public an opportunity to submit public comment. So whether that's by Zoom or teleconference, whatever it may be, just be sure that you are giving the public an opportunity to give public comments. A lot of the times you could notify the public by the notice. You could post all of the information on the township's website, also post a copy on the township hall so people know how to attend electronically so they can give public comment.
Right, and I would just add to that, what it really comes down to is you must have an electronic component, because at the current time, the public does not have an exception under the stay-at-home order to leave and go to a public meeting. They can do a social gathering, they cannot do a meeting of a public body. And so you have to, what that really translates to, even though, yes, we have said that we feel a board, a township board, or in this case, as Seth said, the planning commission could meet in person itself, because under the strictly necessary exception, you're still going to have to provide an electronic component of some form for the public. And I guess I would challenge somebody to explain to me why they think an electronic component is not possible, because nowadays it really is. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to that is you typically have to send out that notice within the 300 feet to the other property owners. So you're going to want to make sure that you have that notice information on that notice, in addition to putting it on your website or posting it at your township hall. And then the other thing that I would add is you can't make this the exclusive way to communicate for a public hearing, but a lot of planning commissions do accept letters of support or letters against a specific issue. That is not a substitute for opening it up for the public to attend and to provide public comment. But if you open at least that element of it too, you could receive letters.
Thank you. And as I guess the moderator, I'm going to take it upon myself to ask another follow-up question with that, because it's one of those things that this is a little bit different than when we first started with the COVID-19 and virtual meetings and in-person meetings and how those went. As we've gone through time a little bit, our position on this has changed slightly, specifically when we're dealing with public hearings. And I know that there's a number of townships that are coming up here the end of June that are working on their budget public hearing for July 1st fiscal year. And, if one of you, maybe Seth or Catherine, would like to explain a little bit more on how how those rules, from our standpoint, how it's changed with looking at, okay, now you're holding a public hearing and the public still during the stay at home, which is at least in place right now, supposedly through June 12th, we'll see how it goes from there. But if you're having a public hearing between now and then, how you need to try to allow the public to be able to participate in that, which might be a little bit different than what we were saying 2 months ago.
Right. Well, Mike, to start off, for example, I have a public hearing tonight that I'll be attending, and it's the matter that's being addressed. Although it's an important issue, it may not necessarily fit into the governor's definitions of necessary to support life. So under that circumstance, that particular public hearing is going to be held electronically. And when that's done, that's when we post notice, as we all discussed, on the township's website at the township hall, and allow people the opportunity to give public comment electronically. In addition, as Cindy said, people can and they might submit letters, stating their position on the matter. Does that answer your question?
Right. And I think the only thing that's really changed is originally what we were answering was whether a township board, doing strictly necessary board business like adopting the budget or approving the payroll, whether the board could meet in person. And
Mhm.
that was in the context of, yes, the exception under the stay at home would apply. Board members in that case would be a critical infrastructure worker,
Mhm.
as long as they were meeting for strictly necessary purpose. And then the governor has clarified in successive executive orders the emphasis on, yes, the public must be allowed to participate if you're doing electronic, but then also not only that, but they can comment. And then she added and clarified, and that those comments can count now for the record, for a hearing, for example. But basically, the emphasis in that original executive order was suspending the requirement to have a quorum present temporarily. So the emphasis is on everybody electronic, period. We do believe you can have an exception for the board to meet in person or partly in person, but the answer now is everything must have an electronic component, period.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple follow-ups come through asking about, well, if you really can't do a teleconference or don't feel that you can or don't want to, due to cell service or whatever it is. I mean, frankly, if you can't provide some type of a means for the public to participate and be there, our position right now would be you shouldn't hold the meeting. If you want to do something different than that, certainly you can, contact your own legal counsel and try to get specific legal guidance from them as far as how to move forward. But our position would be if you can't supply some type of electronic means for the public to be able to be in attendance, specifically if you're holding a public hearing. I mean, the essence of a public hearing is that the public can be there. If they can't be there for a public hearing, certainly you shouldn't be, meeting in person if the public can't attend.
Yeah, and the only thing I want to add to that, Mike, is because I did see a couple of those extra comments about not having the ability. I guess my question would be, is the not having the ability, your 5, 7, 9, how many ever board members it is, depending on the board, is it that they don't have the ability to take in a teleconference? Because that would be the easiest versus a video type conference? Or is your concern that the public doesn't have the ability to have a cell phone or a computer in teleconference or video conference in? Because the emphasis here definitely is on the township and the board having the ability to accept phone calls versus whether or not somebody has a personal cell phone and can call in.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm seeing the question in the chat. Now, if you have the ability to join the webinar live and chat, you're set. You've got the ability to meet electronically.
right.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the Open Meetings Act or these executive order overrides that you're complying with, is that you're giving the opportunity, not necessarily whether or not the public has the means to do that. That burden then shifts to them.
Yeah.
To have a cell phone or to have a computer or to write a letter or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Or to call a township official and express that they need help or whatever it may be.
So getting into the next question here, this person says, I live in an area where a number of people still believe that COVID-19 is, quote, just the flu. There is only one church in the township. In defiance of the executive order, they have held services throughout the entire outbreak. Very few people around us wear masks. Several of the people on the board and or in the office have severe asthma and or other health-related issues. Are we able to deny entrance to our township hall office and to board meetings to those who refuse to wear a mask, unless it's to those who are unable to do so for health or emotional reasons?
Well, right now, I mean, the stay-at-home order doesn't provide an exception for someone to attend a board meeting. So I'm assuming that whoever asked the questions that their board's not meeting in person right now, that whatever their board meetings are being held electronically. I think maybe another way to answer this question is what happens if and when an executive order is lifted and it allows people to attend board meetings and they have board members who have these underlying health conditions that put them at risk to COVID-19. Now, we talked, I believe, a couple weeks ago about the return to work preparedness of the COVID-19 preparedness policy. And in there, it discusses about masks, and you could require people to wear masks. And even right now, I think some of the executive orders do require people to wear masks in buildings. So what I would recommend in this situation is they need to follow whatever the executive orders say, because if the executive orders require someone to wear a mask when they go into a building, and if someone refuses to do so, that's the executive order saying, no, you can't be here. That's not necessarily the township board saying that, even if it's a board member saying, you got to go. It's just, it's in compliance with the executive order that's issued. What they need to be careful is if that executive order limitation of requiring masks is at some point lifted, and then you have a policy that says they can't come in. And that policy at that point may conflict with the Open Meetings Act. That's something they should talk to their township attorney about if and when we get to that point. But for right now, board meetings, there's no exception for people to attend board meetings right now.
Although I will add, we do know from our people who have been holding meetings, which might have been in person with an electronic component, that members of the public do show up.
Mhm.
And there is no exception right now. The governor didn't suspend the part of the Open Meetings Act that prohibits you from prohibiting someone from attending the open session of a public meeting of a public body. So you would have to accommodate, you couldn't send them away, but you could say, we aren't able to socially distance here safely, or you aren't wearing a mask. So the option there is you could adjourn the meeting, you could move outside and finish the meeting outside if the weather allows. You could recess it. If you recess it for no more than 36 hours, you don't have to renotice it. Otherwise, you could, before adjourning, reschedule it. But at this point, unfortunately, if people are going to insist on showing up, you can't really turn them away and continue with your meeting, which is another reason why, again, it's still the emphasis on people aren't supposed to be gathering. And so township board should meet only when strictly necessary if you're going to meet in person with any in-person component. Same with the planning commission. We're going to run into that potentially in July with the board of review, but you aren't supposed to be meeting in person. We have argued that yes, we believe you can, but you still have to maintain that electronic component.
And as a follow-up to that, to the other point is, because they're asking about, the township hall, being open, and can you require that? And I would just add to say that you're never required necessarily to hold, really those specific office hours or to have, normal hours. So certainly, outside of, the required times for tax collection or before an election, you don't need to have your hall open. So certainly if there's a concern there from a hall standpoint and people coming in, you could just choose to keep your hall closed until such time that you felt comfortable, with people coming in. And, certainly now, because we are, kind of in a staged reopening process for part of the state, and maybe one of you can touch on, with the executive order last week, opening up parts of, a large part of northern Michigan, and basically fully the UP into that next phase, and starting to allow, if you can't work remotely, you can go back into offices, and even, allowing, some engagement with people, of groups of 10 or less, as long as they are adhering to a social distancing, what impact that has on, board meetings and halls being open and stuff like that, and what boards can and can't do in those situations. Because at some point in time, probably every region is going to be in that same boat as what northern Michigan and the UP are right now.
Right, and I just want to add, if they would go back and potentially review our last webinar, where Seth and I addressed a lot of these issues about opening up your township hall for those services, and the preparedness plan, not only for your employees, but for the public to come in and, receive services at your township. if for example, you have somebody who's a severe asthmatic and they are in the office working, you may not want that to be the person that goes to the counter and helps assist someone with a building permit. And or you have other precautions in place in terms of keeping that 6 foot of separation. So I believe there is a lot of information we put together in that preparedness plan, as well as that last webinar on how to set up the office situation.
Yeah, and just a couple more comments on that to follow up on that. Yes, in region 6 and 8, the northern tip and the UP offices, there is now the exception for workers to go back to work in an office, meaning that would implicate a township. That's the major change for townships in those regions. And what Cindy just said would apply. The Order 96, which talks about, or the one that talks about the safeguards you're supposed to impose, that's going to apply there. And just to follow up on what Mike was saying, I have to say it because people don't believe me, but township property is not open to the public just because it's publicly owned. You and I can't just wander into the White House. It's publicly owned, but it's controlled by the government. Township board decides what, if any, of its properties or facilities will ever be open, with the exception of, again, open session of a meeting of a public body and on election day for the purpose of going in to vote and leave. Other than that, no one has an entitlement to be in or on township property. And so the board is not required to have anything open. And again, unless you're in region 6 and 8 now, your office is not generally allowed to be open under the orders. You make the argument that you have critical infrastructure workers doing strictly necessarily work in your office that they can't do remotely from home. That's where the other townships in the rest of the state might have people in their offices currently. And what Cindy and Mike have talked about, or sorry, Seth have talked about previously, you have to follow those safeguards.
Yeah, and I think with that too, to your point, Catherine, that in those region 6 and 8 that are opened up now, and they are allowing you to go back in and work in the office, and if the township hall is the office that you're going back into work for, it still doesn't require that you have your township office open to the public.
Right.
It's just allowing those workers. So the next question, kind of falls a little bit into that, but says my township office is primarily in a home. So this person works out of their home. During tax collecting time, can they request appointments only for people that want to come in and pay taxes, and have a box outside the house for people to drop their payments into, allowing them to mail the receipts, and if people want to pay cash, can they require that they have the amount, the actual amount, so they don't have to provide change? Are those things that are allowed?
Do you want to answer, Seth? Do you want me to answer?
It's something we discussed earlier today here at the office, and we're of the opinion that if you do want to set up a Dropbox or something to that effect, that would be appropriate. Regarding appointments, I wasn't quite sure what was meant by appointments as far as actually coming to meet or some sort of phone conference or what. I wasn't sure what they were getting at in that regard. Regarding the exact change, you could certainly ask that they do that, but I believe there's a statute out there that discusses forms of payment and tender, and it might be a situation where if they don't have exact change, then maybe that you do have to provide change to them in the amount that they're owed. And anything you'd like to add, Cindy, I'd welcome.
Yeah, so I'll start there. I am in agreement on the cash side of it. I do not believe you can ask them to pay exact cash. You can say you will not accept pennies. That's what that law you're referencing is. The only thing that's prohibited is not accepting pennies, but you do have to have the ability to give change. And in terms of appointments, there are only a few specific days that they do have to be available in person to take tax payments. So outside of those days, I would argue that they could set up various different avenues for people to pay, whether that is by appointment, drop boxes, coming into the office, whatever it may be.
And I would say too, and I've had this question a couple times, and I've encouraged townships, if they haven't done it in the past, if their bank would be available for it, to look at setting something up with your financial institution, your bank or your credit union, to allow payments in there, especially with the concerns over cash. If your bank will allow it, you can set it up so people can go right into the bank and and pay their taxes that way, which could help offset some of that money handling too.
And if you do that, then you don't have to hold the one day between Christmas and New Year's where the treasurer or his or her
Exactly.
designee is in the office. So there are
Yeah.
advantages to that. Yep.
Yeah, the second part of that question, gets into a question that was asked here on the chat. So I think as we roll into the chat here, I'll start with this one. And really it's, are assessors deemed to be essential workers right now? And can they be working, out of the township hall?
So I'll answer that because that question did come up in the last live webinar, I believe that we did, and we were somewhat in limbo on the answer to that because we hadn't got any direct response from the State Tax Commission on that. In fact, I believe the State Tax Commission's position is that, yes, they can continue to work right now. I know that they are moving forward with the AMARs, and nothing has changed from the state level as it applies to assessing and their ability to do their work every day. Now, with all that said, since we've had the new EO on real estate and opening real estate activities, we do believe through discussions with our MTA legal counsel that assessors would fall under that category of real estate type services or appraisal type services. So that would open the door now for assessors to be out there and be continuing their work in accordance with that EO.
And to follow up with what Cindy said, I mean, assessors do have statutory duties. So that was some of our reasoning for that, of why we think that they're essential. And while you could encourage them to work from home, but if there are times that they need to go to the office for whatever reason, or to go out into the field for whatever reason to perform their job, we do think that would be essential.
And kind of a follow-up on that to the next question is, regarding board of review. And, is it okay for them to meet as usual? I mean, most aren't meeting right now, but certainly into July. And there's question on whether or not they all have to meet in July. So, is there any more guidance on board of review right now?
So that is where we're at with that right now. There is some discussion at the state level as well as with the Michigan Assessors Association and some other, I think, larger units who have retained attorneys to review that EO to determine specifically what that language is requiring the July Board of Review to do. So it's always been MTA's opinion that the July Board of Review has to meet because there are at least the poverty exemption and the veterans exemption where the public could walk in and apply for either one of those applications. We don't say that you have to meet for an hour. It is, again, the public's responsibility to know when you're going to be meeting and to show up timely for that meeting, but it's always been our position that you do need to conduct that meeting. However, there is a school of thought out there that if the assessor does not have any of those applications, or the supervisor, and or there are no other corrections under that 21153, then the July and December Board of Review don't need to meet. So with the new EO allowing those to come appeal their assessment because they may have missed the March Board of Review assessment appeal due to COVID, we know now that they can come do that in July. It's just whether or not your July Board of Review will be open in order for them to do that. And we are diligently working on that. And we believe you need to be open. So if you need to be open, you're going to be hearing those types of appeals. But we are hoping to get a more definitive Q&A from the State Tax Commission on that. And as soon as we do, we will put that resource out to our members, as well as we're hoping to run another live Q&A similar to this, specific to the July board and review, to answer many of those questions. So stay tuned. That's a developing question right now.
Thanks, Cindy. The next question, which hits right at home for me, because I'd like to get my parking spot in my garage back, but until I can hold a garage sale, I can't do that. So the next question is, residents are asking if garage sales are legal. Can people hold garage sales right now? I know there's a lot of, this is kind of the time of year, there's a lot of neighborhood ones, sometimes community-wide garage sales. So can they do that?
The current executive orders prohibit any public or private gatherings of any kind, with the exception that now throughout the state and all the regions, a social gathering can occur with no more than 10 people who are not related in the same household. Basically, we've been living together, we've been isolating together. You can now have other people who haven't been in that same household, but no more than 10, and you have to socially distance. So, and people can do outdoor recreation and walk around. If they're outdoors, I could guess that you could have a yard sale where that might be possible. But the problem is, it's more a question of, first of all, the township doesn't enforce the garage sales unless for some reason you've got an ordinance where you're requiring a license. But I don't know how the township is going to enforce that. If somebody's going to be holding a garage sale, people may or may not choose to adhere to the rules and socially distance.
The next question, and it kind of goes into our meeting question that we were having earlier. And I think to some extent we probably answered this, but this is kind of more specific, and probably hits at home for a number of people. Is they have a township board meeting scheduled for June 11th. Currently, the stay-at-home is in place for that. So they're asking, are we forced to have an electronic meeting? Which the answer to that would be no. You can still meet in person, but you need to have some type of electronic format for that, for the public to be able to participate, if the same restrictions are still in place then. But then they follow up and ask, do voicemails qualify as public comment for the board? So I'm assuming with that, they're talking about if, the supervisor or the township says, hey, here's our number. If you have public comment, call in, leave a message. We'll play that during public comment time. Would that qualify as some type of electronic means for public participation?
Mike, that's a good question. The way I hear it as a voicemail, I think if you've been to a meeting before, there's a lot of times that the township board will say someone couldn't attend the meeting for whatever reason, and they wrote a letter to voice their support or against, or an email, something to that effect. That's maybe how I would treat a voicemail. I wouldn't use that as a substitute for public comment. You could say, I received a voice message from so-and-so, and this is what they said, and you could play it. We've been to board meetings where people will read emails from interested parties who voice their support for or against whatever the agenda matter is in writing. But I don't think I would necessarily treat that as an alternative. Someone needs to be able to participate live with it. You have to have an electronic way for someone to actually call in and provide public comment at your board meeting.
And I agree. I was just thinking that's what we needed to clarify, that you can, because the governor said you can submit your comments in writing, and even to a hearing, it can go to the record. And for the record, a voice message is a writing under the Michigan law, under the FOIA, for example. So yes, it would be good. It would count. But I think what I'm hearing Seth say is, no, you couldn't say, okay, we got these 2 voice messages, nothing else, so we're done with public comment. That can't replace. They can count as comments under public comment or a hearing, but you still have to have a point in the meeting where you're asking if anyone wants to, here's our public comment period. Same with the public hearing. And so people would then be, because you must again have an electronic component at the very least for that, then people could chime in if they had something to add. But the fact that you got some comments in writing doesn't mean you can say that counts. That's it, and we're done.
Yeah. So, and here's another question, kind of following up on meeting notices. And so this must be one where they've sent out notice to those within 300 feet for a public hearing for probably the planning commission. I'm assuming it says, do they need to send out revised notices of electronic access? So they've already sent out the notice regarding the meeting. Now, if they have to allow for electronic access, do they need to renotice that? Or can they just post the electronic access information online on the website or something like that? Or do they need to renotice that?
In my opinion, the prudent approach would be to renotice it.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially
I would agree
if
with Cindy.
that's how you're opening the format.
Right.
Yeah, you have to be able to inform the public of how to participate. And, you know, even for the public hearing that I have tonight, we ran into this issue where we had to arrange this notice to be published multiple times before the public hearing. And I remember speaking with the supervisor back then and stating, I don't know what the executive orders are necessarily going to say a couple weeks down the road. And the way we crafted that public notice was to the extent that, you know, we could meet in public if the executive orders allow, we will. However, if we can't, here's the information to attend electronically, because we didn't want to be stuck in that pickle that we just described, where all of a sudden you have to renotice. And as we know, that costs time and money, and we don't necessarily want to waste resources doing something like that. So I completely agree with Cindy. I think I'd err on the side of caution. Obviously, you can talk to your township attorney too, but I definitely recommend renoticing if the notice did not include a way to participate electronically, and now that's a requirement.
And kind of, you know, another follow-up, you know, I kind of figured a lot of these questions would be regarding meetings and stuff. And this person's asking, is an 18-hour notice with a Zoom link sufficient? So if you are going to have that, you know, what type of notice do you need to provide to get, you know, to the public to let them know, here's how you can provide, or here's how you can participate electronically?
Is it a regular meeting or a special meeting they're Zooming?
Not sure. I mean, we can address
Here's
it
my
from-
example. If it's a special meeting they're just calling now, you need at least 18 hours notice for the meeting under the Open Meetings Act. That doesn't apply to any public hearing notice that might be required. That's separate. You look at the statute. If it was a regular meeting, like they scheduled their meeting in June months and months ago, it's a regular meeting, and now they're going to have the electronic component, just as Seth and Cindy were discussing, whether there's a hearing or not, just the meeting notice itself, you're going to do an electronic component. So yes, I think you would have to renotice that at least 18 hours prior to the start of the meeting by reposting the notice. That doesn't involve mail or publication in the newspaper. That's simply posting the Open Meetings Act notice. Yes, you would do that no less than 18 hours prior.
Perfect. This one I'm going to, as I kind of go through the questions here, I'll address this one real quick. If a stay-at-home order expires on June 12th, will we be allowed or required to have our budget public hearing in person? The current executive order that allows for remote meetings or Zoom electronic meetings, that goes through June 30th. So even if the stay-at-home expires on June 12th, as of right now, you've got through the end of June to still hold electronic meetings. So if you want to schedule it now that way, you're still going to be safe. You know, even if the stay-at-home expires on June 12th, you'd still be safe to go ahead and hold that meeting electronically. This person's asking, for reimbursement of expenses incurred because of COVID-19, can cancellation of all rentals be a legal expense?
I don't know
I'm
what
not
that
sure where they're getting
means.
reimbursed from, but
Yeah, I don't know what that means. If they're saying because we lost revenue because we
mhm.
had to cancel rentals of the hall, then you lost revenues because you had to cancel rentals of the hall.
Yeah, and right now I would say I don't know of any reimbursements that are out there for it, but as I've been telling everybody, keep track of, you know, if you had things rented and you had to, you know, cancel them and you've lost that revenue, certainly keep track of it. And at some point in time, if you can get reimbursed for some of that, you know, it'll identify what you can and can't get reimbursed for then, but certainly I would keep track of it. Here's a question, says, do you know of any resources to tell us what phase we are in according to My Safe Start? I think everybody except for those regions up north, region 6 and 8 are in phase 3 right now. Those ones moved to 3. I saw on another township website in Newaygo County that we are phase 3. How can we find out? When do we go to phase 4? What's the definition of small gathering? There's a whole bunch of questions here, which some of that might get into more looking at which I think, I think we've got it linked to our site, the My Safe Start plan, which identifies the different stages, where we're at, and then what each of the different stages mean for what can be open and in what capacity.
Right, and they just announced yesterday, I think it was, and that's what I was searching for, but it wouldn't let me post it on my screen, but for you to see. But there is a My Safe Start dashboard page now, My Safe Start map, which shows the only 2 phases that anyone's in right now is regions 6 and 8 are in 4, medium risk. Everyone else is in 3, medium high. And that you can track that. It's on the state's website, mystartmap.info, MISTARTMAP.info, where you can look that up. And in terms of the rest of the question, what were they asking after they know?
If we know when, even though we have a definition of each one of those phases, if we have any idea of when those phases will open.
It's all based on the data, and that My Start map is a dashboard. You can click on each section, each region, and see the current data. And what they're looking at is new cases, deaths, percent of the population, and you can see that, and that will at least give you an idea, are we improving? Because those in the My Start original My Start plan, they have certain numbers, certain data points that they want to reach before they can open a region up. So go to that My Start map info and look it up there.
Next question, I'm going to try to get through a couple. We've got a lot of questions coming in and running down on time. So is it okay to conduct a board meeting outside with 6-foot spacing? Certainly, if the weather is conducive to it, you can certainly meet outside. Been telling people, maybe look at pavilions or something like that, or just outside in the parking lot. If you want to meet outside, certainly you can do that.
We're talking about an actual meeting of a public body.
Yeah. This person just asking, and somebody else may have answered it already, but I'm just going through this webinar recorded will be available for viewing later. Yes, in both a video and audio file. So if you think somebody else could benefit by watching this, we'll have it available on our website. Let's see. How long can we continue with electronic board of trustee meetings? Can we use our discretion as to when we go back to regular board meetings? Small room, big risk. Again, right now it goes through June 30th. I think there's a chance that gets extended beyond, just depending on what's going on. But right now you can go through June 30th. Beyond that, we don't know yet. So when the stay-at-home order is lifted and you cannot properly social distance, can we still hold electronic meetings? Again, same thing. I know there's a township that asked for exact cash. Okay, this is getting into cash. They're far from the bank and can run out of cash. So I guess in that case, what would that be, Cindy, when you're talking about tax payments and if you're away from the bank, you've got so much, maybe cash on hand to make change for something, and then all of a sudden somebody brings in, you get 2 or 3 people in a row that come in and want to pay something, and all they've got are hundreds, and now you're out of change that you can provide. What's your answer for that?
What would you do in a normal situation if they came in and paid cash? I mean, you still need to get to the bank one way or another. So if that means you have to delay taking their payment, I would not take their payment until you can provide the cash back, unless we're like right up against the deadline date. That could also sway the decision about how to handle those individual situations. But if you don't have cash, you may ask them to get back with you tomorrow after you can get to the bank. I would say be prepared.
Right. If you think people, and I don't know that the COVID virus is going to change how people are paying. People pay in cash, and treasurers usually know.
They do.
Comes in and pays in cash.
Mm-hmm.
You have your cash drawer, you get that set up, you have enough in there, and like Cindy said, you don't take the payment if you can't make the change, because you aren't going to be able to issue a refund or anything like that, so they can come back.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and this one, now we've got a question that kind of gets into a little bit, of a different topic here. It says they're posting a notice of intent to bond. There's a 45-day right to referendum, but there are complaints about how to gather signatures for the petition during these times. Are there reasonable alternative options for gathering those signatures for a petition for a referendum?
Well,
Catherine, are you-
Seth, can you answer that? I mean, we know that there's some litigation out there right now on affidavits of identity
Right.
for ones that create larger signature.
Well, also on the statewide initiative, there's
Yeah.
a petition, there's a case right now for statewide initiative, but go ahead, Seth.
That was my understanding as well, but I'm not aware of a decision that has come down. Are you?
No.
No. Mm-mm. No, we don't have a guidance on that. I guess from the standpoint, and I don't want to minimize a bond issue is a big deal, but what is driving the deadline or the time frame for doing the bond right now?
Yeah.
That would be the question.
But
Do you
that-
need to do the bond right
Yeah.
now? But yeah, there isn't any guidance yet. We don't have any guidance on gathering petitions.
This person asked, they said, they talked to their attorney, they understood the latest executive order of opening up northern regions to still require remote working if it's possible, and that there were no exceptions applicable to the townships or other governments. I think that is true that, if you can still work remotely, you're supposed to work remotely. But certainly if you can't, you can go back into the township, into the office, to continue to work.
And because you're critical, if you're critical infrastructure workers, if the board has designated your position
Yeah.
as critical.
Or now in the northern regions where offices can get back open, that is specific to, if you can't work remotely.
Right, still subject to the board as the employer making the decision.
Exactly. Cindy,
I
this is
saw
another
a
one.
quick cash one there about, well, can we make them go get a money order? No.
No.
They want to pay in cash, they got to pay in cash.
Yeah. Now, if they want to go get a money order, they certainly can, but
For sure.
that's up to them. Cindy,
Voluntary.
here's another one for you. Are assessors able to measure houses now? So we've said that they're essential and that they can work, but can they be out in the field measuring things and doing field work?
I believe they can. Seth, what do you think about that?
In order for them, they can do what they need to do in order to satisfy their statutory duties.
Yeah.
I do think they're essential to the extent they should work from home, but if they need to do something to satisfy their statutory duties that requires them to either be in the office or on the field, I think they can.
Right. And as Catherine said, even in the previous question about the bond, sometimes the question is, do you have to do it today?
Right.
Can it wait? Can it wait until the July 1st or?
And I would just caution, because this question comes up even without the virus, as an assessor, you don't have the authority to simply go on people's property. You are still
Correct.
subject to trespass. So you have the authority, the Girl Scout rule, you have the authority to walk up the path to the main entrance and ask a person of responsibility whether you can be on the property. If you don't get that, or they say no, you march right back out the way you came with no detours. Anything you can observe from the street or from a property where you do have permission, flying over, but don't think that if we say, oh yes, you could probably go out on properties. Again, you never just have the authority to go out on properties. And especially now when people may be particularly sensitive to somebody coming on their property, I'd think carefully, like Cindy said, do you really need to do that? Or should you be updating your cards or things back at the office?
And this person, and I don't know that we have an answer for this right now. I mean, wait and see or just cancel it. But they said our township's recycling falls on the 13th of June, which is after the June 12th deadline. And they're asking, should this be canceled? I'm guessing it's a township-wide recycling program that they offer. I've gotten a number of these questions regarding, trash days and stuff like that. They're asking, should it be canceled? I mean, I think, unless somebody wants to object, I don't know that we can really answer that right now, other than probably being pretty confident to say,
Right.
It's probably unlikely to be, a lot's going to be different between now and June 13th, but, maybe. And if people can recycle without having to be in contact with one another, then, maybe there's something to go there.
Right. I had that question and I asked the township, it was only the one township, so I don't know its representative, but I said, Are you talking about a specialized one, like here locally, they do a electronics day where they have a special pickup and they have a company that comes in to pick up your old refrigerators and TVs and things like that? Or is it just, hey, it's recycling day? And they said, it's just recycling day. I'm like, that you can reschedule. No one's going to lose out on that. But if it is something where you had some big arrangement made and staff and parking lot and storage space and the company coming in, well, that might be a little different. Then maybe you try doing some extreme social distancing as long as it's all outdoors.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say too. I agree. I think it's really just depends on how it's set up. I mean, if people don't even get out of their car and you have a worker pulling it out of the truck and throwing it into a big dumpster, I mean, we know that transfer stations and that have the ability to operate right now. So really probably depends on the format for it.
Next question says if people can call in and leave a message for a meeting of a public body for public comment or something, is there a cutoff for it as far as how long? I don't know that there's a specific cutoff, but generally a answering machine is going to cut somebody off after a couple minutes. So if they've extended 2 minutes on the answering machine, they're going to eventually shut them down. So
I'd say take those messages up to the point that either the meeting begins or we get to public comment if you want to.
Yeah, and for public comment, if people. Yeah, exactly.
Public comment is just plain old general public comment. People can always comment next month or next week, and they got plenty of ways to tell you what they think. If it's a public hearing, there might be a different answer, and you want to talk to the attorney you're working with on whatever the matter is in that public hearing as to when we should cut off receiving written comments or recorded comments. But for plain old public comment, they got another bite at the apple next month.
Mike, I'm going to jump in because I did see this one earlier too, and now they just asked it again about the training, firefighter training, if they have the ability to conduct firefighter training right now. Again, I'm going to defer to what is the format for that and what is the necessity of it. If somebody has to have their training completed by, let's say June 1st, if that's a state requirement in order to keep up some type of certification and that has not been delayed by that state agency, then possibly they need to go through the training. There may be alternative ways to get the training, whether it be online. But if you're just holding training for the purposes of wanting to compensate your firefighters because they're losing some pay because they have regular training set up 4 times a month, I'm not sure that that in itself would be considered essential right now. I think you just have to look at each individual situation, and if you have a question, check with your legal counsel.
Yeah, and getting into another question, and this gets into parks, which maybe can be touched on briefly, is we have a small township park, and residents asked when nets will go up for pickleball. So any movement on parks, what can be done with parks? So I think probably that can be done, but you guys can touch a little bit on the park aspect.
I would just suggest, again, outdoor recreation's been allowed as long as you still have the 10-person unrelated household 10-person social gathering. But also with pickleball, there is a facility. If you're bringing your own pickleball mallets and balls, I'm not sure there'd be a problem. But if you're requiring somebody, the township is providing equipment or maintaining equipment, that's the problem because we're not open for business for that. You can have if your park is open and the nets are up in the pickleball courts and people show up with their own equipment, I guess I don't see a problem with that as long as they aren't gathering. And so to the question of leagues, which is what I've gotten on ball leagues, I don't think you're in a position to open it up and say we're open for business for the leagues because that's a gathering of going to be more than 10 people. So if right now the campgrounds, the parks, the outdoor facilities, people can access them. If you're opening the park, people can access them, but they shouldn't be accessing indoor facilities. You shouldn't have staff providing equipment. Those things are not allowed yet. Perfect.
Next question here. This gets back to taking cash for tax payments. And they said, can you refuse to take cash when your notice states no cash? We have no cash drawer. You can't do that. You can't state that because the law requires that you have to take cash if somebody wants to pay in cash. So no, regardless of whatever notice, what state, you can't say that we're not going to accept cash.
Well,
Correct.
but you can say cash or otherwise, this is not the correct amount.
Correct.
You to bring me the correct amount, because we don't
Yeah.
get to issue refunds and do the over under. That's not people should be paying the amount.
This one gets into campaigning, which we don't really get into because that's a personal matter, not a township matter, but maybe just as a general direction, this person's asking what are the feelings about campaigning, not sure what I need to do because don't want to offend anyone either way. Campaigning right now during COVID and being out knocking on doors or whatever. I don't know if anybody wants to touch on that just for a second.
Yeah, that's a private matter.
Yeah.
And they should follow the executive orders. But yeah, there wouldn't be any campaigning from the township's perspective. You can't do that on the township's time and dime.
Yeah.
I'll add one little note, because of the whole issue about the filing petitions, nominating petitions. Now that was for the August primary. Shouldn't have that issue going forward, but township officials, candidates for township office have the option and have had it to file a fee instead of petitions, just because that did come up previously.
Yeah. And this is a question we've got a couple times, maybe Seth wants to touch on it, or Catherine, I know you've been working on it too, but can township campgrounds be open now?
Okay, so this is another issue that we've discussed as well. So I know there's some exemptions for, I think it's section 6 or 8 and what they're open, and they're open to an extent, but I don't recall seeing an exemption for campgrounds for people to be staying overnight in a campground setting.
Right.
So
Yes.
I don't believe that's permitted at this time.
That's correct. The only exception is if for some reason it's being used to house emergency workers for COVID purposes, like doctors or nurses who came in from out of state. And that applies to hotels, motels, or any rental, including a campground. But other than that, no campground anywhere in the state, it's under the governor's orders, should be open for overnight camping. No one can offer overnight accommodations, period, unless it's the example I just gave. You can have the campground open for day camping, people showing up and using the facilities like we said, but you can't provide, bathrooms and the facilities. Those are not open unless it's the emergency COVID workers. So nothing's open yet, just day outdoor recreation.
Yeah.
Including, I had the question this morning, no short-term rentals. That's the same thing as a hotel, motel kind of.
Yeah. And I know we're supposed to wrap up by 1. We're pushing 1 o'clock right now. We do have a couple more questions, so if you want to hang tight, everybody, certainly if you need to drop off, I understand, but if you want to hang tight, we'll go ahead and try to get through these last couple questions that we've got here. The first one here, or the next one, kind of talks about a little bit what we talked about earlier, but really more specific and straight to the point is, can we deny somebody entry if they don't have a mask on? So, when you get into, the executive order that requires in any indoor space, you're supposed to have a mask on if you can medically tolerate it or whatever. Can you deny the entry? And then at what point, I guess the other question would be is, if they don't have one on because they claim that or whatever, can you ask or can you have them show proof, or is there anything that you can do to, or do you just have to take their word for it that they medically can't tolerate that over their face?
So, Catherine, and maybe you're aware, but I'm not. I don't believe there's anything that requires someone to show proof that they can't medically tolerate wearing a mask. And I know this
Unless
came up,
it's to the employer, I would imagine.
right?
Not
and no, not to just someone coming into the township hall. And then, Mike, I know earlier, we discussed, this very issue about, board members who are at risk. And right now there's an executive order that says if you're going to be in an enclosed building, you have to wear a mask, or a public enclosed building.
And
so,
you can't stay 6 feet apart.
And you can't sit right. So you can't stay 6
Right.
feet apart. So if that's what we're dealing with, it's going to be, there's a lot to consider here, because we have certain parts of, as Catherine said earlier, of the OMA that haven't been suspended. Then also we have executive orders, I mean, that they have the ability to basically to be the law. So you're going to have conflicting provisions of what is not suspended and what an executive order order says. So I think if we're dealing with a situation where someone's coming into the township hall and they can't satisfy those requirements, and it's someone who should have a mask on, I think at least the minimum, you definitely should talk to your township attorney, so you're not going to be, you don't want to subject yourself to liability of an OMA claim, which I think if there's an executive order that says you have to have a mask on and you don't fit under the exceptions, in other words, you can't satisfy those social distancing requirements, and if you're indoors in a public place, and if the township does want you to, if they want to refuse you access because you're not wearing a mask.
Yeah, I think as Seth is saying, I agree. In a meeting, if we're talking about, and we've already covered this, what we said earlier on meetings of a public body, public's not supposed to be there, public shows up, they should be doing all the precautions, social distancing and safety, but hall, no one has a right to go in the hall. No one has a right to just come in the hall and say, I want to be here. And there's nothing that should be happening at the hall right now where the public is coming to the hall. And as we discussed, you don't have to use the hall. So right now, in terms of refusing somebody access to the hall, yeah, you can refuse people access to the hall as long as you're not discriminating against person. You are not required to have the hall open to anybody. The board can have policies. People can get in this foyer, but no further than that. Now, if you're talking about employees, that goes to what Cindy and Seth have covered in their plans previously. The employer is the employer. And, there may be slightly different rules there. But right now, most township offices are still not in Regions 6 and 8. So it's all down to the board designating who can come in the first place. So no one has a right to just be in a township building of any kind. If it's a meeting, we've already covered that. So I think at this point, yes, there are going to be situations in which you can ask somebody not to come in because it's indoors and they're going to pose a safety risk. And then you look at, if you are reopening your building, I'm sure Seth and Cindy have covered this before, but just like the retail stores, put up the sneeze guards at the counters and have masks for the employees, again, who can wear them. These are things that you can require. The public doesn't have a right to simply appear in your building and do what they want.
And Catherine, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I know I've gotten the question a couple times too regarding porta potties in parks. Certainly if you've got bathrooms or whatever, those facilities are open, but some I know will just put porta potties down at maybe trailheads or things like that. Are there restrictions that they shouldn't be putting porta potties out there right now, or things that they need to think about from that aspect, if that's something that they generally do?
I'm not aware that people put them out and leave them open all year as someone who actually uses trails. So if they're talking about for the season, well, the season isn't open yet in the sense of facilities. Again, how are you going to have them sanitized? How are you going to make sure they're clean? I wouldn't put any facility or unlock any facility at this point until we hear otherwise from the governor. Outdoor recreation is encouraged, but not going into a facility where people are going to be touching things and leaving all kinds of germs. So no, I wouldn't go ahead and do that. I don't know that there'd be any pressure to put that out there yet. That is a limitation on using a park, but you go to the park knowing that that's the limitation.
Yeah. So two more kind of regarding parks and stuff, and then I got one more final one, and then we'll wrap up today. So, kind of on the parks, they're saying they've got pavilions and playscapes at their park. They're currently closed. They're asking, should we configure per the stay-at-home order to avoid potential gatherings and surface contaminations, or continue to keep them closed? Should they open them? What would be maybe a best practice for that?
I think we've already answered this. If it's outdoors and people can come for a few hours and recreate and not get in social groups of more than 10 unrelated people, it's okay. But we're not supposed to be creating a situation to tell people it's okay to do something other than that. Now, if there's just playground equipment and people are recreating, socially distancing, but they're touching the playground equipment, there's an issue there, but people are taking that risk. I know the CDC and other people have said there may not be as much a risk from touching surfaces. I don't know whether that's the answer. I think people have to be reasonable and act in your own self-interest as well as everyone else's, and take precautions, take wipes, take sanitizers. If you need to wear gloves, do it. If you need to wear a mask, you wear a mask. I wear a mask.
Yep.
If you're taking the kids to use the playground equipment, I think I'd be wiping their hands once before we get back in the car. So if you have those concerns, people, now, having said that, it's hard to enforce some of these things. I don't think the township is responsible for enforcing all the executive orders. And frankly, in many parts of the state, law enforcement are not able, or even in some cases willing to enforce. You do the best you can by not trying to attract people to these don't encourage people to the circumstances.
Yeah, and I think, and to that, if you've got them closed, certainly you can keep them closed. If you want to open them, again, open them with the understanding that, if people are going to use them, they use them at their own risk, and, assume that they should be following the rules. One more follow-up on the campground is they want to know, do the campground rules apply to private campgrounds also?
Yes.
Yes.
Everything I just said applies to them as well.
Yeah. And so the final question, this one might be, maybe I'll throw this one at Cindy for the last one. And it's sort of COVID related, but maybe not. What if your treasurer isn't in the office or around, and someone comes in to pay cash or taxes? Can you turn them away and ask them to come back when the treasurer is working?
Well, it depends on your policy, because technically the treasurer is the only one that can receipt money, which means taking in money, because you have to provide a receipt for that money or that payment, whether it's a tax payment or any other kind of payment. Again, I can hear Catherine saying, why are they coming in, paying for things right now? But let's just assume that you are letting them come in and pay for a building permit. If your treasurer has delegated the authority to receipt money to someone else, then yes, that a treasurer can do that. The treasurer doesn't need to be there. Their deputy does not need to be there. But there's a difference between taking in money and receipting it versus accounting for it as a tax payment, as a paid tax payment through the software and those requirements. So anybody can take in money and receipt it as long as the treasurer has given that authority. If they're an employee of the township board, then the township board would also have to agree that that is one of their duties, is to take in cash. So yes, I know some townships that don't go that route, and maybe they have that drop box. So if someone comes in to pay, they maybe give them an envelope, or the person has an envelope and they tell them that the treasurer is unavailable right now and they can drop the payment. If they don't want to drop the payment, then they can give them the treasurer's phone number to make other arrangements. Personally, I think you need to make it as convenient and as customer friendly as possible, regardless of whether your treasurer is on site or not.
Thank you, Cindy. I think with that, that's our final question here. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to thank Seth, Cindy, and Catherine again for joining me to put this together for you. Certainly, as these executive orders keep coming out, keep checking back to our website. When they first come out, we spend the time to try to go through them to better understand them, to get appropriate information out to everybody, the best that we can. Some of them are quite confusing for us too, so bear with us as we wade through them to try to get accurate information out to everybody. And we'll continue to have these and update information as it comes out. So with that, and since I haven't done this before, I think I'll take the opportunity to thank Amy West, Shelley Cardenas, and Jen Fiedler, also our illustrious crew that helps make these productions possible. They're the brains behind the operation that make this possible. So as you've seen over the last few of these, hopefully they've run a little bit smoother. We get some better transition and stuff, and that's because they're working hard to make sure that everything happens appropriately for everybody. So with that, I want to thank you all again, and take care, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.